The judge laughed at a veteran's plea. But 60 bikers walked into the courtroom. The morning sun barely broke through the thick clouds hanging over Cincinnati, Ohio, casting a gray pallor over the city. It was the kind of overcast day that seemed to mirror the heaviness in Marcus Webb's chest as he sat at the small kitchen table in his cramped apartment. The clock on the wall read 6:47 a.m., but Marcus had been awake since 4:30, unable to sleep, his mind racing with worry about what lay ahead. At 42 years old, Marcus Webb looked older than his years. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of deep creases that came not from age but from carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear. His dark hair was peppered with grey at the temples, cut military short out of habit more than preference. His brown eyes, once sharp and alert, now held a perpetual weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. Marcus stared at the notice on the table in front of him, the words blurring together as his eyes lost focus. Final notice, eviction proceedings. The paper had arrived 3 weeks ago, but it felt like a lifetime. 3 months behind on rent, $3,600 he didn't have. 3 months of choosing between paying rent and buying groceries, between keeping a roof over his head and filling his prescriptions for the PTSD medication that kept the nightmares at bay. He had served his country for 12 years. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He had seen things that haunted him still, things that woke him up in cold sweats, gasping for air, convinced he was back in Fallujah, back in the chaos and the fire and the blood. He had come home with medals on his chest and scars on his soul, and now he was facing homelessness. The apartment around him was sparse but clean. Marcus kept it that way out of military discipline. The small living room had a worn couch he'd bought from a thrift store, a coffee table with one leg slightly shorter than the others, and a television that only worked when it felt like it. On the wall hung his service photos and his discharge papers, framed and kept immaculately dust-free. They were reminders of who he had been, of the man who had once stood proud in his uniform, who had believed he was making a difference. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person. A small stove, a refrigerator that hummed too loudly, and a handful of mismatched dishes. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked a real meal. Mostly, he ate at the VA clinic or survived on whatever was cheapest at the corner store. His disability check from the VA barely covered his medications and basic needs, and finding steady work had proven nearly impossible. He had tried. God knows he had tried. After his discharge, Marcus had applied to dozens of jobs. Security positions, warehouse work, anything that would hire someone with his skills. But the PTSD episodes made it difficult. The sudden loud noises that sent him diving for cover. The crowds that made his heart race and his palms sweat. The flashbacks that came without warning, pulling him back to the desert, to the IEDs, to the friends he'd lost. He'd managed to hold down a job at a construction site for 8 months, the longest stretch since his return. The physical labor had been good for him, kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. But then came the incident. A truck had backfired on the street nearby, and Marcus had hit the ground, covering his head, his body responding to muscle memory from a war zone thousands of miles away. His co-workers had stared. Some had laughed nervously. His supervisor had taken him aside, kindly but firmly, and suggested that maybe this wasn't the right environment for him. After that, the rejections had piled up. "We're looking for someone with more recent experience. We've decided to go with another candidate. We'll keep your resume on file." Code words that all meant the same thing. "We don't want to deal with your problems." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. The neighborhood wasn't great, but it wasn't the worst either. Working-class families, people struggling to get by just like him. Across the street, he could see Mr. Patterson leaving for his shift at the factory, lunch pail in hand. 2 doors down, Mrs. Chen was already sweeping her front steps, the way she did every morning without fail. These were his neighbors, people who had waved to him, who had asked how he was doing. He had helped Mrs. Chen carry her groceries up the stairs once when her arthritis was acting up. He had shown Mr. Patterson's teenage son how to change a tire. Small things, neighborly things, and now he was about to lose all of it. The court date was set for 2 p.m. that afternoon. Marcus had been to the courthouse before, trying to work out a payment plan with his landlord's attorney, but they had been unmoved by his circumstances. "Everyone has problems, Mr. Webb," the lawyer had said, shuffling papers without looking up. "The law is the law." Marcus checked his phone. 7:15 a.m. He had a call scheduled with his caseworker at the VA at 9, and then he needed to get ready for court. He had ironed his one good shirt the night before, pressed his khaki pants with military precision. He wanted to look respectable, wanted the judge to see that he was trying, that he wasn't some deadbeat looking for a handout. He opened his laptop, an old model that took forever to boot up, and checked his email. There was a message from Robert Bull Martinez, the president of the Patriot Guard Riders, a motorcycle club made up mostly of veterans who had found brotherhood on the road after their service ended. Marcus had met Bull at a VA support group 6 months ago, and the older veteran had taken an immediate liking to him. The email was short. "Hang in there, brother. Remember what we talked about. You're not alone in this. Bull." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. Bull had been checking in on him regularly since Marcus had mentioned his housing situation. The veteran community was tight-knit, looking out for each other in ways that civilians often didn't understand. When the government and society failed them, they had each other. At 9 a.m. sharp, Marcus's phone rang. It was Sarah Mitchell, his VA caseworker, a woman in her early 30s who genuinely seemed to care about the veterans she served, though she was overworked and understaffed like everyone else in the system. "Marcus, how are you holding up?" Sarah's voice was warm but tinged with concern. "I've been better, Sarah," Marcus admitted, sitting back down at the kitchen table. "Court's this afternoon." "I know. I wanted to call before you go. I've been working on getting you into the transitional housing program, but the waiting list is long, 3 to 4 months at minimum." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I don't have 3 to 4 months, Sarah. I have 3 hours." I know. He could hear the frustration in her voice, the same frustration he felt. "The system is broken, Marcus. There are too many veterans in your situation, and not enough resources. I'm fighting for you, but I need you to understand that this is going to take time." "Time I don't have," Marcus repeated quietly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I've drafted a letter for you to present to the judge. It outlines your service record, your disability status, and the steps we're taking to get you stable housing. It might help, it might not, but it's something. Thank you, Sarah, I mean it. You've done more for me than anyone else. You served your country, Marcus. You shouldn't be fighting this battle alone. I'll email the letter to you right now, print it out and bring it with you." After the call ended, Marcus downloaded and printed the letter. He read it through twice. Sarah's professional language detailing his service, his struggles, his efforts to find work. It was all there in black and white, the story of a man who had given everything and been left with almost nothing in return. At 11:30 a.m., Marcus began getting ready. He showered, shaved carefully, trimmed his hair as best he could with the cheap clippers he'd bought at a dollar store. He put on his pressed shirt and pants, polished his shoes until they shined. Looking in the mirror, he tried to see what the judge would see. Would they see a veteran deserving of compassion, or just another person behind on their bills, another case to be processed and dismissed? He gathered his papers. The eviction notice, Sarah's letter, his VA disability paperwork, his discharge papers. Everything that proved he was who he said he was, that his struggles were real and documented. He placed them carefully in a folder, the same way he had once maintained his military records, with precision and care. The bus ride to the courthouse took 30 minutes. Marcus sat near the back, watching the city pass by through the scratched window. Cincinnati was a city of contrasts. gleaming downtown towers visible in the distance, while the neighborhoods he passed through showed the wear and tear of economic hardship. Boarded-up shops, faded signs, people waiting at bus stops with the same tired expressions he saw in the mirror. The courthouse was an imposing stone building downtown, built in the early 1900s with the kind of architecture meant to inspire respect and a little fear. Wide steps led up to heavy wooden doors, flanked by columns that spoke of justice and permanence. Marcus climbed the steps slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. Inside, the building was cooler, the marble floors echoing with footsteps. People moved through the corridors with purpose, lawyers in expensive suits, clerks carrying stacks of files, families huddled together, speaking in worried whispers. Marcus found the directory and located his courtroom, 3B, third floor. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the physical activity to burn off some of his nervous energy. By the time he reached the third floor, his heart was pounding, though whether from the climb or the anxiety he couldn't tell. Courtroom 3B was at the end of a long hallway. Marcus arrived at 1:30 p.m., early as always. He sat on one of the benches outside the courtroom, watching other people arrive for their cases. Most looked as worried as he felt. This was the civil court, where disputes over money and property were settled, where lives were changed by the stroke of a judge's pen. At 1:50 p.m., a bailiff opened the courtroom doors and called for everyone with cases on the afternoon docket to enter. Marcus stood, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The courtroom was exactly as he had expected. Wood paneling, rows of benches for spectators, a raised platform where the judge would sit, and the seal of the state of Ohio hanging on the wall. The air smelled of old wood and legal documents, a scent that seemed to exist in every courthouse in America. Marcus took a seat near the front, wanting to be visible, wanting to show that he took this seriously. Other people filed in around him, each with their own stories, their own battles to fight. He recognized a few faces from the neighborhood, people in similar situations, facing evictions or foreclosures or legal battles they couldn't afford to lose. At exactly 2:08 p.m., the bailiff stood. "All rise," the Honorable Judge Richard Caldwell presiding. Everyone in the courtroom stood as Judge Caldwell entered through a door behind the bench. He was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead, wearing the traditional black robes of his office. His face was stern, showing no emotion as he took his seat and looked out over the courtroom. "Be seated," the bailiff instructed, and everyone sat. Judge Caldwell adjusted his reading glasses and picked up the first file from the stack in front of him. Marcus's stomach churned. He had no way of knowing when his case would be called, how long he would have to sit and wait while his fate hung in the balance. The judge began working through the docket, his voice crisp and businesslike. Case after case, he listened to brief arguments, made his rulings, and moved on. Some people left the courtroom relieved, others in tears. The law, Marcus was learning, was efficient, but not always merciful. 40 minutes passed, then 50. Marcus's name still hadn't been called. His palms were sweating, and he wiped them on his pants, trying to stay calm. He had faced enemy fire, had walked through minefields, had carried wounded brothers through hostile territory. He could handle this. He had to. Finally, at 2:52 p.m., the bailiff called out, "Case number 47B, Davidson Properties LLC versus Marcus Webb." Marcus stood, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. This was it. This was the moment everything would be decided. He walked forward to the table reserved for defendants, his folder clutched in his hands. Across from him, at the plaintiff's table, stood a young attorney in an expensive suit, representing his landlord. The lawyer didn't even look at Marcus, just leafed through his papers with the air of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Judge Caldwell looked down at the case file, then up at Marcus. "Mr. Webb, you're here regarding eviction proceedings for non-payment of rent. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "And do you dispute that you owe 3 months' rent totaling $3,600? No, Your Honor, I don't dispute that I owe the money, but I'd like to explain my circumstances, if I may. Judge Caldwell sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested he had heard it all before and wasn't particularly interested in hearing it again. Mr. Webb, the law is quite clear on these matters. If you owe the rent, the landlord has the right to evict. Your circumstances, while perhaps unfortunate, don't change the legal facts. Your Honor, I'm a disabled veteran. I served 12 years in the military, including 3 combat tours. I received disability benefits for PTSD, and I'm currently working with the VA to get into transitional housing. I have a letter here from my caseworker. Marcus stepped forward to hand the letter to the bailiff, but Judge Caldwell waved it away dismissively. Mr. Webb, I'm sure you have a very compelling story. But this courtroom hears dozens of cases every day. Everyone has problems. Everyone has reasons why they can't pay their bills. If I made exceptions for everyone with a sad story, we'd never get through the docket. Marcus felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation rise in his chest. Your Honor, with all due respect, this isn't just a sad story. I served this country, and I thank you for your service. Judge Caldwell interrupted, his tone perfunctory, as if he was reading from a script he'd memorized years ago. But your service record doesn't entitle you to live rent-free. The landlord has rights too, Mr. Webb. The lawyer representing the landlord smirked slightly, sensing an easy victory. Marcus tried again, his voice more urgent now. I'm not asking to live rent-free, Your Honor. I'm asking for time. Just a few months to get into the VA housing program. I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can. I just need a little more time. Judge Caldwell leaned back in his chair, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose as if Marcus was giving him a headache. Mr. Webb, do you know how many times I hear the phrase, "I just need more time" in this courtroom? Every single day. If I gave everyone more time, landlords would never collect their rent and the whole system would collapse. But I'm not everyone, Your Honor. I'm a disabled combat veteran. Yes, you've mentioned that. Judge Caldwell's voice took on an edge of irritation. Mr. Webb, let me be frank with you. Your military service is commendable, but it ended years ago. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own life. You can't keep using your veteran status as an excuse for every failure. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The courtroom seemed to spin around him. The judge had just dismissed his entire service, his sacrifices, his trauma, as if it was nothing more than an excuse, a crutch for a weak man who couldn't get his life together. Your Honor. Marcus's voice was shaking now, though whether with anger or hurt he couldn't tell. I'm not using it as an excuse. I'm trying to explain why I need help. I wake up every night having nightmares about watching my friends die. I can't hold down a job because loud noises make me think I'm back in a war zone. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for understanding. I'm asking for the same compassion that I was promised when I signed up to serve. Judge Caldwell actually laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh exactly, but it was dismissive. The laugh of someone who found the whole situation mildly amusing in its absurdity. Mr. Webb, the world doesn't owe you compassion. The world doesn't owe you anything. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. He picked up his gavel, ready to render his judgment. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Webb, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. If you fail to do so, the sheriff's office will forcibly remove you and your belongings. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. Marcus stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. 30 days. He had 30 days before he would be on the street. The judge hadn't even looked at Sarah's letter, hadn't considered his circumstances, hadn't shown even a shred of the compassion he had begged for. The attorney for the landlord was already packing up his briefcase, his job done. Judge Caldwell was reaching for the next file, ready to move on to the next case, the next life to be decided in a matter of minutes. Marcus turned and walked back to his seat on shaking legs, his vision blurred with unshed tears. He had faced down enemy combatants. He had survived firefights and explosions and the death of men he loved like brothers. But in this moment, in this quiet courtroom in Cincinnati, Ohio, he felt more defeated than he ever had in combat. Because in combat, you knew who the enemy was. You could fight back. But here, the enemy was indifference, bureaucracy, a system that saw him as nothing more than a case number, a problem to be processed and dismissed. Marcus sat down heavily, his head in his hands. Around him, the courtroom continued to function, other cases being called, other lives being decided. But for Marcus Webb, the world had narrowed to this single, crushing moment of defeat. He had served his country with honor. He had sacrificed his mental health, his peace of mind, his ability to live a normal life. And in return, he had been laughed at by a judge who couldn't be bothered to see him as anything more than another person behind on their rent. It was in this moment of deepest despair that Marcus heard something. At first, he thought it was his imagination, or perhaps a memory from his time in the service. But then it grew louder, unmistakable. The rumble of motorcycles, not just one or two, but many. The sound grew and grew, echoing through the walls of the courthouse, until it seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. And Marcus Webb, sitting in that courtroom with his head in his hands, felt the first stirring of hope he'd experienced in months. The rumbling of the motorcycles grew louder, impossible to ignore. Judge Caldwell paused mid-sentence in the case he was hearing, his brow furrowing with irritation. The bailiff exchanged confused glances with the court clerk. People in the courtroom began looking around, murmuring to each other, trying to identify the source of the growing thunder outside. Marcus lifted his head, his heart pounding. He knew that sound. He had heard it before, at VA gatherings, at memorial rides, at the motorcycle rallies, where veterans gathered to remember fallen brothers and support each other. That was the sound of brotherhood, of men and women who had served, and who understood what that service meant. The engines were idling now, right outside the courthouse. Through the tall windows, Marcus could see flashes of chrome and leather, American flags mounted on handlebars, the distinctive patches of the Patriot Guard riders visible on the backs of vests. Judge Caldwell banged his gavel sharply. "Bailiff, what is that noise? Are we having some kind of demonstration?" Before the bailiff could respond, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The sound of boots on marble echoed through the space, and Marcus turned to see Bull Martinez walking down the center aisle. Bull was a mountain of a man, 6'4", and built like the linebacker he had once been before joining the Marines. He was 63 years old now, his beard more gray than black, but he carried himself with the bearing of a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life. His leather vest was covered in patches, Marine Corps insignia, American flags, POW/MIA symbols, and the Patriot Guard Riders logo front and center. Behind Bull came more riders. One by one they filed into the courtroom, filling the benches, lining the walls. They came in all shapes and sizes, all ages and races, but they all wore the same uniform. Leather vests, jeans, boots, and the unmistakable bearing of men and women who had served in the military. Marcus watched in stunned disbelief as the courtroom filled with bikers, 10, 20, 30, 40. They kept coming, a sea of leather and denim, of grey beards and weathered faces, of eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Judge Caldwell's face had gone from pale to red. He banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in this court! What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Bull Martinez stopped at the front of the courtroom, directly in front of the judge's bench. He didn't appear intimidated by the judge's anger. If anything, he looked calm, centered, like a man who knew exactly why he was there and wasn't going anywhere until he accomplished his mission. "Your Honor," Bull's voice was deep and measured, "my name is Robert Martinez. I'm the president of the Cincinnati chapter of the Patriot Guard Riders. We're here in support of Marcus Webb. This is highly irregular. Judge Caldwell sputtered. "You can't just march into a courtroom with a gang of—" "We're not a gang, Your Honor," Bull interrupted, his tone respectful but firm. "We're veterans. Every single person in this room served in the United States military. Every single person in this room understands what it means to sacrifice for their country. And every single person in this room is here to support one of our brothers." Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. He hadn't told Bull about today's court date. He had mentioned it once weeks ago in a moment of despair at a support group meeting. But Bull had remembered. Bull had organized this. Bull had brought the cavalry. More bikers continued to file in. 50, 55, 60. The courtroom was packed now, standing room only. Among them, Marcus recognized faces from the VA, from support group meetings, from chance encounters at veteran events. There was Jimmy Wrench Sanders, who had lost his right leg in Afghanistan and now walked with a prosthetic that never seemed to slow him down. There was Maria Gonzalez, one of the few female riders who had served as a combat medic in Iraq and had more stories than most men twice her size. There was old Tommy Chen, a Vietnam veteran in his 70s, who still rode his Harley like a man half his age. They all stood there, silent and solid, a wall of support for a brother in need. Judge Caldwell was standing now, his face flushed with anger. "Bailiff, call security. I want these people removed from my courtroom immediately." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Bull said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We have every right to be here. This is a public courtroom. We're not disrupting proceedings. We're not making threats. We're simply here to observe and to show our support for a fellow veteran." "This is intimidation," Judge Caldwell shouted. "No, Your Honor," Bull replied calmly. "This is solidarity. There's a difference." The landlord's attorney had backed away from his table, looking nervous. The bailiff had his hand on his radio but seemed uncertain about what to do. The situation was unprecedented. Yes, the bikers had entered the courtroom en masse, but they weren't being violent or disruptive. They were just standing there, watching, waiting. Bull turned to address the judge directly. "Your Honor, I was sitting outside this courtroom for the past hour. I heard everything that was said in Marcus Webb's case. I heard you dismiss his service as if it meant nothing. I heard you laugh at a man who wakes up every night reliving the horrors of war. I heard you tell a decorated combat veteran that his country doesn't owe him compassion." Judge Caldwell's face went even redder. "Now you listen here." "No, Your Honor, you listen." Bull's voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. "Every person in this room has a story. Jimmy Sanders over there lost his leg when his convoy was hit by an IED in Kandahar. He spent 18 months learning to walk again. Now he works at a bike shop making minimum wage because his disability check isn't enough to live on." Bull gestured to another rider. "Maria Gonzalez held her best friend in her arms as she died from shrapnel wounds. She has nightmares so bad that she sleeps with the lights on. She's been homeless twice since her discharge." He pointed to another. "Tommy Chen fought in Vietnam. When he came home, people spit on him, called him a baby killer. He's spent 50 years trying to forget what he saw over there. He's been to 73 funerals for brothers who couldn't handle the memories and took their own lives." The courtroom was absolutely silent, except for Bull's voice. Even Judge Caldwell seemed frozen, unable to interrupt. "And Marcus Webb," Bull continued, turning to look at Marcus. "Marcus Webb served 3 combat tours. He earned a Bronze Star for pulling 2 wounded soldiers from a burning vehicle while under enemy fire. He was there when his unit was ambushed outside Fallujah. 6 men died that day, 6 brothers. Marcus still hears their voices. He still sees their faces. And you want to know why he can't hold down a regular job? Because this world, this safe, comfortable civilian world, doesn't make sense to him anymore. Because he gave 12 years of his life and his peace of mind to protect people like you, Your Honor. And all he gets in return is judgment and condescension." Judge Caldwell finally found his voice. "This is still a court of law, Mr. Martinez. The law is clear. Mr. Webb owes rent. He has to pay it or vacate the property. My personal feelings don't change that. Then change the judgment, Bull said simply. Grant him an extension. Give him time to get into the VA housing program that his caseworker has been fighting to get him into. Show him the compassion that he deserves. Show him that his sacrifice actually meant something. I can't just arbitrarily change my rulings because a bunch of bikers show up and pressure me, Judge Caldwell said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. We're not pressuring you, Your Honor, Bull replied. We're reminding you that the man standing in front of you isn't just a case number. He's not just another person behind on their rent. He's a veteran. He's a hero. He's someone who put his life on the line so that you could sit safely in this courtroom and make your judgments. Another rider stepped forward. It was James "Pops" Wilson, a 70-year-old Korean War veteran with white hair and eyes that had seen more than any person should. Your Honor, if I may speak. Judge Caldwell looked like he wanted to say no, but something in Pop's weathered face stopped him. He nodded reluctantly. I'm 70 years old, Your Honor, Pop said, his voice surprisingly strong for his age. I've been riding with these men and women for 20 years. You know what we do. We attend the funerals of fallen service members. We stand between grieving families and protesters who would spit on the graves of heroes. We escort injured veterans to hospitals. We raise money for families who lost their breadwinners in service to this country. We do this not because we're paid, not because we're looking for recognition, but because we remember. We remember what it was like to come home and feel forgotten. We remember what it was like to sacrifice everything and receive nothing in return. He took a step closer to the bench. Marcus Webb is our brother. When a brother falls, we don't abandon him. We lift him up. And right now, Your Honor, Marcus is falling. He's drowning in a system that's failed him. The VA is understaffed and overwhelmed. The benefits he was promised take months or years to process. The mental health care he desperately needs has waiting lists that stretch for months. And now, after surviving 3 combat tours, after facing down death more times than he can count, he's about to be thrown onto the street. The courtroom was so quiet that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He looked at the faces of his brothers and sisters in arms, all standing there for him, and he felt something break open inside his chest. All the pain, all the fear, all the shame he had been carrying alone for so long suddenly felt lighter, shared among 60 people who understood. Judge Caldwell sat back down slowly. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since the hearing had begun. Marcus could see something shifting in the judge's expression, the rigid certainty cracking, revealing something more human underneath. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion, I'm not asking for a handout. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking for a chance to get on my feet, a chance to get into the housing program that I've been working toward, a chance to prove that I'm more than my worst moments, more than my struggles. I know I owe that rent. I know I have obligations. But I also know that I gave everything I had to this country, and all I'm asking for in return is a little understanding. Bull stepped forward again. Your Honor, if you'll allow it, the Patriot Guard riders are willing to help Marcus make his rent payments. We've already started collecting funds from our members. We take care of our own. We just need time to organize it properly. Give Marcus 3 months. That's all we're asking. 3 months to get him into stable housing and get him back on his feet. We'll make sure the landlord gets paid. The landlord's attorney started to object, but Judge Caldwell held up his hand, silencing him. The judge looked around the courtroom at the 60 faces watching him, waiting for his decision. These weren't just random bikers. These were veterans, men and women who had served their country, who bore the scars of that service, both visible and invisible. The judge looked down at his papers, then back up at Marcus. When he spoke, his voice was different than it had been before. Softer, more human. Mr. Webb, I want to apologize. My comments earlier were inappropriate. Your service does matter. Your sacrifices do matter. And you're right, you deserve better than what you've received from this court and from the system as a whole." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I've been on this bench for 15 years. I've heard thousands of cases. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that behind every case number, there's a person, there's a story, there's a life." Judge Caldwell looked at the landlord's attorney. "Counselor, I'm going to ask you to speak with your client. Tell them that I'm strongly encouraging them to work out a payment plan with Mr. Webb. Tell them that if this case comes back to my courtroom, I will be very interested to hear why they couldn't show flexibility to a disabled combat veteran." The attorney nodded quickly, clearly sensing which way the wind was blowing. The judge turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Webb, I'm going to grant you a 90-day stay on the eviction proceedings. That gives you 3 months to work with your VA caseworker to get into permanent housing and to work with these gentlemen to address the back rent you owe. I'm also going to order your landlord to accept a payment plan for the outstanding balance, to be determined by mutual agreement." Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you." Judge Caldwell nodded. "Don't thank me, Mr. Webb. Thank them." He gestured to the bikers filling his courtroom. "They're the ones who reminded me what justice actually means. They're the ones who showed me that compassion and law don't have to be mutually exclusive." He banged his gavel gently. "Case number 47B is continued for 90 days. Mr. Webb, I expect to see you back here in 3 months with a progress report, and I expect that report to be positive. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor, crystal clear." "Good. This court is in recess for 15 minutes. Judge Caldwell stood and left the bench, but before he exited through the back door, he paused and looked back at the assembled bikers. "Thank you for your service, for your loyalty to each other, and for reminding this court what we're supposed to stand for." Then he was gone, and the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. The bikers rushed forward, surrounding Marcus, patting him on the back, hugging him, lifting him up both literally and figuratively. Marcus felt overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face, but for the first time in months they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than despair. Bull wrapped his massive arms around Marcus in a bear hug. "Told you we had your back, brother. We don't leave anyone behind." "I didn't know," Marcus managed to say through his tears. "I didn't know you were coming. I didn't ask." "You didn't have to ask," Bull said firmly. "That's what brotherhood means. We look out for each other. Always." Jimmy Sanders rolled up in his wheelchair, grinning. "Man, did you see that judge's face when we all walked in? Thought he was going to have a heart attack." Maria Gonzalez laughed, punching Marcus lightly on the shoulder. "We've been planning this for 2 weeks. Bull called everyone in the chapter. We weren't going to let them throw you out without a fight." Pops Wilson came over, his eyes twinkling. "You did good in there, son. Stood your ground, spoke your truth. That takes courage." Marcus looked around at all these faces, these brothers and sisters in arms who had dropped everything to come to his defense. "I don't know how to thank you all. I don't know how to repay this." "You don't repay it," Bull said. "You pay it forward. When you're back on your feet, when you're stable again, you do the same for another brother or sister who needs help. That's how we keep this going. That's how we take care of our own." The bailiff came over, looking sheepish. "Sorry, folks, but I need to clear the courtroom. Judge has other cases to hear." Bull nodded. "Understood. Come on, everyone. Let's take this celebration outside." The bikers filed out of the courtroom in the same orderly fashion they had entered, but now there was a lightness to their steps, a sense of victory and solidarity. They had come to fight for one of their own, and they had won. Outside the courthouse, the sidewalk was lined with motorcycles. Harleys, Indians, Hondas, every kind of bike imaginable, all gleaming in the afternoon sun that had finally broken through the clouds. Pedestrians had stopped to watch, some taking pictures, others just staring in amazement at the sight of 60 bikers gathered on the courthouse steps. Bull stood at the top of the steps and raised his voice so everyone could hear. Brothers and sisters, today we stood up for one of our own. Today we reminded the world that veterans are not forgotten, that we don't abandon each other, and that brotherhood means something. Today was a good day. Cheers rose from the assembled bikers. Car horns honked in support from passing vehicles. A few veterans in the crowd gave crisp salutes. But our work isn't done, Bull continued. We promised that judge we'd help Marcus get back on his feet. So here's what's going to happen. We're taking up a collection to cover his back rent. I don't care if you can only give $5. Every little bit helps. We're also going to make sure Marcus has food, has what he needs until he gets into that VA housing program. And we're going to check in on him regularly, make sure he knows he's not alone. Marcus felt overwhelmed again. Bull, this is too much. I can't ask you all to... You're not asking, Bull said firmly. We're offering. There's a difference. Riders began pulling out their wallets, passing around a helmet that Maria had designated as the collection bucket. Bills went in, 5s and 10s and 20s, more money than Marcus had seen in one place in months. Some riders pledged to send more when they got home. Others talked about helping Marcus find job opportunities, connecting him with veteran-friendly employers. An older gentleman in a suit came up the courthouse steps, looking curious. "Excuse me, but what's going on here? Are you folks protesting something?" Bull turned to him with a smile. "No, sir. We're celebrating. We're celebrating brotherhood, justice, and the fact that one of our own got a second chance today." The man looked confused. "I don't understand." "One of our brothers, a combat veteran, was about to be evicted," Bull explained. "He'd fallen on hard times, the kind of hard times that a lot of veterans face when they come home. The judge was going to throw him out without a second thought. So we came here to remind that judge that every veteran deserves better than that. And today, we won." Understanding dawned on the man's face. "Are you all veterans?" "Every single one of us," Bull confirmed. "Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, different branches, different eras, but all brothers and sisters." The man reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. "Here, add this to whatever you're collecting. My son served in Afghanistan. He came home with problems too. I wish there had been people like you around when he needed help." Bull took the money, clasping the man's hand. "Thank you, sir. And thank your son for his service." Others began to approach, civilians who had been watching from the street. Some contributed money. Others just wanted to shake hands, to say thank you, to express their support. It seemed that the sight of 60 bikers standing up for a veteran had touched something in the community, reminded people that these were men and women who deserved respect and support. Marcus watched it all with a sense of wonder. Less than an hour ago, he had been standing in that courtroom feeling more alone and defeated than he ever had in his life. Now, he was surrounded by brothers and sisters, by people who saw him not as a burden or a problem, but as someone worth fighting for. By the time the collection was finished, they had raised over $4,500, more than enough to cover Marcus's back rent and give him a buffer for the next few months. Marcus couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop thanking everyone, couldn't stop feeling like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Bull pulled him aside. "Listen, Marcus, I know you're feeling grateful right now, and that's good, but I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't us feeling sorry for you. This is what family does. We look out for each other, and you're family now. You got that?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Good. Now here's what's going to happen next. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call Sarah at the VA and tell her what happened here today. You're going to work with her to expedite that housing application. You're also going to start coming to our weekly meetups. We ride every Sunday, rain or shine. It's not just about the bikes. It's about having people who understand what you've been through. It's about not being alone. I'll be there," Marcus promised. "I'll be there every week. And one more thing," Bull said, his voice gentle now. "I want you to start seeing the therapist at the VA regularly. No excuses, no skipping appointments. You need to deal with what you've been through, and you can't do that alone. Will you do that for me? For yourself?" "I will." Marcus said. "I promise." Bull pulled him into another hug. "Good man. Now let's get you home. Some of us are going to escort you back to your place. Make sure you get there safe. Then we're going to have a beer and celebrate this victory properly." As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and the engines roared to life, Marcus stood on the courthouse steps and looked out over the scene. 60 motorcycles, 60 brothers and sisters, all here because he mattered, because his service mattered, because he was worth fighting for. The sun was shining now, bright and warm, burning away the last of the morning's clouds. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling like he could finally breathe again after drowning for so long. Today, he had learned something important. He had learned that he wasn't alone. He had learned that there were still people who cared, who remembered, who understood. He had learned that brotherhood was real, that loyalty meant something, and that sometimes when you needed it most, the cavalry really did arrive. As the motorcycles pulled away from the courthouse in a thunderous convoy, horns honking and flags waving, Marcus rode on the back of Bull's bike, holding on tight, feeling the wind in his face and the weight lifting from his shoulders. He was going to be okay. With help, with support, with brothers and sisters who had his back, he was going to be okay. And that was everything. 3 weeks after the courtroom incident, Marcus stood in the parking lot of Eddie's Cycles, taking a deep breath before walking in for his first day of work. He was nervous, his palms sweating, his heart racing. It had been months since he'd had a regular job, and the fear of failure was almost overwhelming. But he wasn't alone. Jimmy Sanders had pulled up on his motorcycle moments earlier, rolling his wheelchair out of a specially designed trailer attached to his bike. "You ready for this?" Jimmy asked, grinning. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied. "Eddie's a good guy. He's not going to throw you in the deep end. He'll take it slow, let you get comfortable. And if you have a rough moment, just tell him. He'll understand." They walked into the shop together, and Marcus was immediately struck by the smell of oil, metal, and leather. It was a good smell, a working smell. The shop was spacious, with several motorcycles in various states of repair. Tools hung neatly on the walls, organized with the kind of precision that suggested a military background. Eddie Thompson was a man in his early 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a ponytail and a full beard that made him look like a biker Santa Claus. He wore faded jeans, motorcycle boots, and a T-shirt that read, "Vietnam veteran, all gave some gave all." "You must be Marcus," Eddie said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes warm. "Jimmy's told me a lot about you." "All good things, I hope," Marcus said, trying to smile despite his nervousness. "Well, he told me you're a hard worker who's fallen on some tough times. That's good enough for me. Any brother of Jimmy's is welcome here." Eddie gave Marcus a tour of the shop, explaining the various services they provided: motorcycle repairs, customization, parts sales. The work was varied, which Eddie explained would help keep things interesting and prevent boredom. "Now, I want to be up front with you," Eddie said as they settled into his small office. "Jimmy told me about your PTSD. I have it too, been dealing with it for 50 years, so I understand what you're going through. If you need to step outside, if you need a break, if something triggers you, you tell me. No judgment, we'll work through it together." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, Eddie. You don't know how much that means." "Oh, I know exactly how much it means," Eddie replied. "When I came back from Vietnam, there was nobody like me willing to hire a screwed-up vet. I had to fight for every opportunity. I promised myself that if I ever had my own business, I'd hire veterans. Period. You're the 7th vet I've brought on over the years. Every single one of them worked out great once they got their confidence back." The first few days were challenging. Marcus was rusty with his mechanical skills, and there was a lot to learn about motorcycle repair, specifically. But Eddie was patient, showing him techniques, explaining the intricacies of different bike models, never making Marcus feel stupid for asking questions. On the 3rd day, a truck backfired on the street outside. Marcus dropped the wrench he was holding and dove behind a workbench, his body reacting before his mind could process what was happening. He crouched there, breathing hard, his heart hammering, mentally back in Iraq, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the chaos. Eddie was there within seconds. He didn't touch Marcus, just knelt nearby and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Marcus, you're in Cincinnati. You're at the shop. You're safe. There's no danger. Just breathe, in and out, nice and slow." It took several minutes, but Marcus gradually came back to himself, the present reasserting itself over the past. When he finally looked up, Eddie was still there, his expression patient and understanding. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize," Eddie said firmly. "You just had a flashback. It happens. You think I never dove behind my workbench? You think I don't still hear helicopters in my sleep? This is part of who we are now, Marcus. But it doesn't have to define us, and it sure as hell doesn't mean we can't work." Eddie helped Marcus to his feet. "Take 5 minutes. Go outside, get some air, center yourself. Then come back in and we'll keep working. That's how you beat this thing. You don't let it win. You acknowledge it, you deal with it, and then you keep moving forward." Marcus stepped outside, hands shaking. But when he looked across the parking lot, he saw Jimmy watching from the office window, giving him a thumbs up. The simple gesture reminded Marcus that he wasn't alone. These men understood. They had been where he was. They knew the struggle. 5 minutes later, Marcus walked back into the shop, picked up his wrench, and got back to work. By the end of the second week, Marcus was settling into a routine. The work was satisfying, using his hands to fix things, to make them run smoothly again. There was a meditative quality to it, a focus that kept his mind occupied and away from darker thoughts. He was also attending the Patriot Guard Riders meetings every week. The camaraderie there was unlike anything he'd experienced since his discharge. These were people who understood what he'd been through, who didn't judge him for his struggles, who celebrated his victories no matter how small they seemed. One Sunday, the group had a memorial ride for a young Marine who had died by suicide. 50 riders, Marcus among them, escorted the family to the cemetery, forming an honor guard while the service was held. Afterward, as they stood by the grave, Bull spoke to the assembled riders. "This is why we do what we do," Bull said, his voice heavy with emotion. "This young Marine survived 2 tours in Afghanistan. He survived firefights and IEDs and everything the enemy could throw at him, but he couldn't survive the war in his own head. He couldn't survive the feeling that he was alone, that nobody understood, that there was no way out." Bull looked around at the riders. "Every single one of us has been where he was. Some of us have come closer to that edge than we want to admit, but we're still here. And we're still here because we found each other. Because we realized we didn't have to fight this battle alone." He pointed to the headstone. "We failed this young man. We as a society, we as a veteran community, we as human beings, we failed him. He should be here. He should be riding with us. He should be alive. And the only way we can honor his memory is by making sure we don't fail the next veteran who's struggling. We reach out, we check in, we show up. We don't let anyone fight alone." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. He thought about how close he had come to being that Marine, how many times he had looked at the bottles of pills in his medicine cabinet and thought about ending the pain. But Bull and the others had pulled him back from that edge. They had reminded him that life was worth living, that he mattered, that his story wasn't over yet. After the service, Maria Gonzalez pulled Marcus aside. "You okay?" she asked gently. "Yeah," Marcus said, wiping his eyes. "It just hits hard, you know. That could have been me." "But it wasn't you," Maria said firmly. "And it won't be you, because you have us now, and we're not going anywhere." 4 weeks after his first day at Eddie's Cycles, Marcus got the call from Sarah at the VA. His transitional housing had been approved. He could move in the following week. The apartment was in a converted building that the VA used to house veterans in need. It was a studio, small but clean, with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and enough space for a bed and a small sitting area. The rent was based on his disability income, leaving him with enough money for food and basic necessities. When Marcus first walked into the empty apartment, he felt overwhelmed. This was his fresh start, his chance to build a new life. True to their word, the Patriot Guard riders showed up to help him move. Since Marcus didn't have much furniture from his old apartment, the riders had collected donations. The furniture store owner brought a bed, a dresser, and a small table with chairs. Someone else donated a couch. Maria showed up with boxes of kitchen supplies, towels, and bedding. By the end of the day, the studio apartment looked like a real home. It was modest, but it was his, and it was stable. Standing in the center of the room, looking around at everything his brothers and sisters had done for him, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. That evening, after everyone had left, Marcus sat on his new couch and called his sister in California. They hadn't spoken in over a year, a casualty of his downward spiral and her inability to understand what he was going through. "Marcus?" Her voice was surprised, cautious. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, Jenny, everything's okay. Actually, everything's better than okay. I wanted to call and let you know that I'm getting my life back together." He told her everything, about the eviction proceedings, about the judge laughing at him, about 60 bikers showing up to support him, about his new job and his new apartment. He told her about Bull and the Patriot Guard riders, about the community he had found, about how he was finally getting the help he needed. Jenny was crying by the time he finished. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't know how bad things were. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you." "It's okay," Marcus said, and he meant it. "I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to let anyone in. But I'm learning now. I'm learning that it's okay to be vulnerable, to admit when you're struggling, to accept help from others." "I want to help," Jenny said. "What can I do?" "Just stay in touch," Marcus replied. "Check in on me sometimes. Let me tell you about the good days and the hard days. That's all I need." They talked for another hour, rebuilding the bridge that had been damaged by Marcus's struggles and Jenny's inability to understand. It wasn't a complete fix, but it was a start. Over the next few months, Marcus's life continued to improve. His job at Eddie's Cycles became full-time, with better pay and benefits. He was getting better at managing his PTSD, using the coping strategies Dr. Stone taught him, knowing when to step away and take a break, when to ask for help. He became a regular presence at the Patriot Guard riders' meetings and events. He went on memorial rides, stood honor guard at veteran funerals, and helped with fundraising efforts. The more he gave to the community, the more he received in return: friendship, purpose, belonging. One day, about 6 months after the courtroom incident, Marcus was working on a particularly difficult repair when a young veteran walked into the shop. He looked to be in his mid-20s, thin and nervous, with the same haunted look in his eyes that Marcus recognized from his own mirror. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, wiping grease from his hands. I heard you guys hire veterans," the young man said, his voice shaking slightly. "I just got out of the army 3 months ago. I've been trying to find work, but nobody wants to hire someone with my issues." Marcus saw himself in this kid, saw the desperation and the fear of rejection. He called Eddie over. "Eddie, this is—" Marcus paused, realizing he didn't know the kid's name. "Trevor," the young man supplied. "Trevor Mendez. I served in Afghanistan." Eddie looked Trevor over, and Marcus could see the recognition in the older man's eyes. Here was another veteran in need, another brother struggling to find his place in the civilian world. "Trevor, we might have an opening in our parts department," Eddie said. "It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. You willing to learn?" Trevor's face lit up with hope. "Yes, sir. I'm willing to learn anything." "Okay, fill out an application. Marcus here will show you around, tell you what we do. We'll see if it's a good fit." As Marcus gave Trevor the tour, explaining the various aspects of the business, he felt something unexpected: pride. He was paying it forward, just like Bull had asked. He was being the person for Trevor that Bull had been for him. That evening, Marcus attended his therapy session with Dr. Stone. They had been working together for almost a year now, and Marcus had made significant progress in managing his PTSD and rebuilding his life. "You seem different today," Dr. Stone observed. "More centered, more confident." "I met a kid today," Marcus said. "Young veteran just out of the service, struggling to find work. I saw myself in him, who I was 6 months ago, and I realized something." "What's that?" "I realized that my struggles, everything I went through, it wasn't meaningless. It taught me empathy. It taught me compassion. It taught me the importance of community and support. And now I can use those lessons to help others. I can be for that kid what Bull and the Patriot Guard riders were for me." Dr. Stone smiled. "Marcus, that's a significant insight. You've transformed your pain into purpose. That's one of the most powerful things a person can do." "I still have bad days," Marcus admitted. "I still have nightmares. I still have moments when a loud noise sends me right back to Iraq. But now I have the tools to deal with it. I have people I can call. I have a community that understands. And I have purpose." "Tell me about that purpose." Marcus thought for a moment. "For a long time, I felt like my service didn't matter, like I'd given up so much for nothing. But now I understand that my service isn't over. It just changed form. Instead of protecting people with a rifle, I'm protecting them with support and understanding. Instead of fighting an external enemy, I'm fighting the stigma and isolation that veterans face when they come home." "That's beautiful, Marcus, and it's real. You're making a difference." 8 months after the courtroom incident, Marcus stood in that same courthouse, but this time under very different circumstances. Judge Caldwell had requested to see him, and Marcus had no idea why. He entered the judge's chambers nervously, remembering the last time he'd been in this building, how defeated he'd felt. But this time, Bull was with him, a show of support and solidarity. Judge Caldwell stood when they entered, extending his hand. "Mr. Webb, thank you for coming, and Mr. Martinez, thank you for joining him." They shook hands and sat down. Judge Caldwell looked older than Marcus remembered, more tired, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Webb, I asked you here because I owe you an apology. A real apology, not the half-hearted one I gave in the courtroom that day. What I said to you was wrong. The way I treated you was wrong. You came before me asking for help, and I dismissed you. I laughed at your pain. That was inexcusable." Marcus was taken aback. "Your Honor, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," Judge Caldwell interrupted, "because what happened that day changed me. When those 60 bikers walked into my courtroom, they didn't just stand up for you. They held up a mirror and forced me to look at what I'd become. I had turned into the kind of judge who saw cases instead of people, who valued efficiency over compassion, who forgot that every person standing before me is fighting their own battles." He leaned back in his chair. "After you left that day, I went home, and I couldn't stop thinking about what Mr. Martinez said. About all those veterans struggling, all those men and women who served their country and came home to a system that failed them. I started researching, reading about veteran homelessness, about PTSD, about suicide rates. The statistics are horrifying." "They are," Bull agreed. "That's why we do what we do. I've made some changes," Judge Caldwell continued. "I've been working with the VA to develop a veterans treatment court program here in Cincinnati. It's a specialized court designed specifically for veterans facing legal troubles related to their service-connected disabilities. Instead of punishment, we focus on treatment and support. We connect them with resources, housing, mental health services." Marcus felt his breath catch. "Your Honor, that's incredible." "It's a start," Judge Caldwell said. "And it was inspired by you, Mr. Webb, by your courage in standing up there and telling your truth, even when I tried to silence you, by those bikers who reminded me what justice should actually look like." He reached into his desk and pulled out a photograph. It showed the courtroom packed with the 60 bikers, their faces serious and determined. Someone had captured the moment and sent it to him. "I keep this on my desk now," Judge Caldwell said. "It reminds me why I became a judge in the first place. Not to push through cases as efficiently as possible, but to actually help people, to dispense justice with compassion, to remember that the law should serve humanity, not the other way around." Bull spoke up. "Your Honor, what you're doing with this Veterans Court, that's going to save lives, real lives, not just keep people out of jail, but actually give them a chance to heal and rebuild. That's the hope," Judge Caldwell said. "And Mr. Webb, I'd like to ask you something. Would you be willing to speak at the launch of the program, to share your story? I think it would be powerful for people to hear from someone who's been through the system, who knows how it feels to be dismissed and marginalized, but who also knows what recovery looks like." Marcus looked at Bull, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, Your Honor, I'd be honored to speak. Thank you, and please call me Richard. When we're not in the courtroom, we're just people." As Marcus and Bull left the courthouse that day, walking down those same imposing steps that Marcus had climbed in despair 8 months earlier, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. The circle had closed. The judge who had laughed at him had become an advocate. The system that had failed him was being reformed. His pain had been transformed into purpose. "You know what this means?" Bull said as they reached the sidewalk where their motorcycles were parked. What's that?" "It means we won. Not just the case, not just getting you housed and employed. We actually changed the system. We made it better for every veteran who comes after you." Marcus thought about that. About Trevor, the young veteran he'd helped at the shop. About all the other veterans still struggling, still fighting their own battles. About the Veterans Court that would help them find treatment instead of punishment. "We did good work," Marcus said. "Damn right we did. And we're not done yet. There's always another brother or sister who needs help, always another fight to be fought." They mounted their motorcycles, and as the engines roared to life, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for the journey he'd been on. It hadn't been easy. There had been dark days, moments of despair, times when he'd wanted to give up. But he hadn't. He had kept fighting, and he had found brothers and sisters willing to fight alongside him. As they rode through Cincinnati, the wind in their faces and the sun breaking through the clouds, Marcus thought about everything he'd learned over the past 8 months. He had learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was courage. He had learned that brotherhood was real and powerful and life-changing. He had learned that his service wasn't over. It had just taken a different form. He had learned that one person's pain could become another person's purpose. He had learned that systems could change, that justice could be reformed, that compassion and law could coexist. But most importantly, he had learned that he mattered. His life mattered. His struggles mattered. His story mattered. And he would spend the rest of his life making sure that every veteran who came after him knew that they mattered too. Because that's what brotherhood meant. That's what service meant. That's what it meant to truly leave no one behind. As the motorcycles thundered down the highway, American flags streaming in the wind, Marcus Webb smiled. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And that made all the difference.